could you talk a little bit about the pattern of that we're seeing right now about the CDFA using the excuse, and the USDA, that they must spray us because the quarantine is hurting them, even though the quarantine was initiated by our pest designation that was initiated by the U.S. and not by the other countries.
Right. Well, you know, I think that these strategies were developed a long time ago to manipulate how the public was capable of responding, right? So that they would freeze the public out of the public dialogue by not really having, you know, a dialogue that was really open. So most of the decisions are made at the CDFA and Cal EPA level, and they're made without public input, right? And since it's an emergency eradication program, you know, which never has worked. I mean, the eradication programs don't work because you can't eradicate insects. You know, I mean, there's only 12 insects on the endangered species list. So here they are trying to do something that nobody really has ever done. You know, and in this case, they say, well, it's just a control program. But if the control program works, guess what? They're going to the next level. And they actually put a article in the paper last week that said, look, if you don't let us use this pheromone, then we're going to even stronger chemicals. And that's what happened in New Zealand when they were trying to control the same pest, which wasn't a serious pest there either. And what they did is they started using these chemicals and they blew it up into a major pest. And then after doing this for several years, they realized, oh my God, we are not controlling this, and it's a big problem now. And so they went back to a biological control program. And so our argument is, let's get the biological control critters that they used to control pests. And they've already found some trichogramma wasps that are little tiny wasps. They're not a pest to human beings. And they've already found these wasps that will work on that light brown apple moth. So our argument is develop a program where you're using, you know, beneficial insects instead of, you know, putting any kinds of chemicals in the air. The other thing they want to do is, during the medfly eradication program in Los Angeles and the oriental fruit fly eradication programs, neither of which eradicated the fruit flies or oriental fruit flies, right? They took Naled, which is this incredibly toxic organophosphate, and they put dollops of it on the backs of stop signs and on lamps, and that's what they're going to do now. They're going to have pesticides on all of these public, you know, like posts, whether it's a lamp post or a stop sign post or a stoplight post. There'll be little bits of pesticide on there that will be, you know, to control this bug, right? And so, like, we have to be really careful of this. Naled is one of the most toxic chemicals. What if a little kid jumps up and hits the stop sign? You know, like I always did when I was a kid. You'd walk by the stop sign, you'd jump up and hit the stop sign, you know, walk on. Well, your hand could hit right on that Naled, and that is an incredibly toxic pesticide, right? And you could go all over LA County, because I was running the Rural Toxics Project when that spray was going on, and there was Naled all over these stop signs and all over these street lights, and that's what they're proposing to do for this light brown apple moth is hang stuff on these signs. Instead of sliming it on the signs, they're going to hang it on the signs with a little bow tie thing. So you'll be able to see it, but I mean, that doesn't really help you, because what it means is that chemical is in your environment off-gassing all the time, you know, and so that's what you have to be careful of, because they're spray happy. They want to pull the trigger because they presume that that's the only way they can control these pests, and so their strategy is to spray, and you have to be resistant against them. You cannot let them do it. You have to, you know, do direct actions to stop them. You have to be in their face. They don't understand anything except pressure, you know, and you're the folks that have to bring the pressure. I mean, you're the ones that are getting sprayed. Would that we could bring pressure for you in Vermont, you know, because I'm sure everybody is on your side there, you know, that is in the organic movement and all around the rest of the country. We're going to have organic farms sprayed, and how many times are we going to let them be sprayed and still call them organic with this material? How many times, you know? Personally, they shouldn't be sprayed at all, I think. I think, you know, they should not be sprayed because inerts in these chemicals are not organic inerts, you know, and so let's, you know, be aggressive, you know, support your organic farmers by getting out there in the street and get them out there in the street to speak with you, because they need to be out there defending themselves. They need to be defending themselves, so.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk real quickly about what over-application does specifically to throw the balance, you know, the beneficials off?
Yeah, I mean, like, when we first came onto our farm, there were no beneficial insects and there were no earthworms, like I said previously in the presentation I gave. But, you know, what, you know, that resulted from the guy being totally dependent on chemicals. He was the former deputy ag commissioner in Vermont, and the agriculture departments in almost all states are pro-chemicals, right? So he was pro-chemicals. He didn't see anything wrong with them, so there were chemical cans spread all over our farm. Well, just having those chemicals on the farm all the time suppresses your beneficial insects. Now, we have so many beneficial insects because we've bought them in. We bought in big-eyed bugs, soldier beetles, spiny soldier bugs, lacewings, ladybugs, and we have a whole bunch of critters on the farm that we didn't buy. Syrphid flies are all over our farm. And we also bought trichogramma wasps. They're native now to our farm. They overwinter, even though it gets 20 degrees below zero at our farm during the winter. They can overwinter on your farm, and we have large populations of beneficial insects that are on our farm that are taking care of our pests. When I'm down at the river and I take a swim and I come out and I'm a little bit wet and I'm sitting in the sun, I will have 10 syrphid flies on my legs, you know, drinking water and licking up salt. And those syrphid flies, those 10 syrphid flies have been on my plants taking care of pests, right? And so they're working all the time, and they work when we're asleep. They actually, most of the pests and the beneficial insects are nocturnal, right? Most of the entomologists, you know, work during the daytime, as do most of the farmers, right? And so we don't really ever see the pests working at night, but that's where they do a lot of their work, right? And that's where they do a lot of their eating. And so do the beneficials. And so they're there all the time. You know, they're 24-hour employees of ours. And they don't cost that much. You know, if we feel like we don't have enough of them, we buy more. You know, we buff up the population. And that's what works. That's what we need in our cities. And in Northern California, if we had less spraying, we'd have more beneficials, and we wouldn't even have a light brown apple moth surviving, probably, because there'd be enough predators, including birds and everything else that gets diminished, including bats, which are, you know, getting diseases. All of those things get diminished by the use of pesticides, right? And so, I mean, if we don't stop this spraying pretty soon, you know, I mean, it's time. You know, it was time in Rachel Carson's era, right? But now it's really a better time, because during Rachel Carson's era, there wasn't an organic choice. If you were going to eat organic during Rachel Carson's time, you had to grow it. You know, there wasn't an organic market, right? And so, you know, now there is. Now people have a choice, and, you know, the choice that you ought to make is organic, and you need to protect your food, and you need to protect your air, because if they start spraying this stuff, you know that a lot of critters that you might not even know are there working for you are going to get hurt and killed. You know, what we usually find is the longer a pest is in an area, the more it becomes adapted, right? And they, you know, they adapt very quickly because they have a lot of generations a year. You know, that's what takes place so fast, right? And that's why resistance takes place so fast, is because, like most pests and most beneficials, have 10 to 15 generations per year, you know, and we have them every 30 years, you know what I mean? And so that's the difference in, you know, how fast stuff mutates and changes so that to adapt to certain things. And so I anticipate if the light brown apple moth became established, that it would be variable. You know, it might exist from north to south. It might exist more in hot areas, but we don't know that. You know, we don't know exactly what's going to happen because every pest that gets, you know, like imported changes.
Can you speak to the notion that they're planning now to spray people with chemicals that they refuse to tell us exactly what's in them? Can you talk about what you think of that? I mean, is that your book talks about the deception, the history of deception with respect to the health effects that these chemicals have on people, and now it's reached the point where they're not even going to tell us what they're spraying on us, so that should we become sick, we might not know exactly what it is that they put in that.
Yeah, it's been a long time struggle for people that are worried about pesticides, and the issue is the issue of inerts. And inerts are, see, the active ingredient in a pesticide is the pesticide, is what the pesticide is named for. Like methyl bromide, the active ingredient is methyl bromide, but there's inerts in methyl bromide, mixed with methyl bromide, and one of them is chloropicrin. They don't have to tell you that chloropicrin is in methyl bromide if they mix it in there, because they own the recipe. And so it's a trade secret, and so they don't have to divulge that trade secret, right? Kelthane, which was a miticide that was closely related to DDT, in 1995 it was found that there were still really high levels of DDT in the groundwaters in Stanislaus County in the San Joaquin Valley, around where Modesto is. And it turns out that was a big dry bean growing area, pintos and limas and so forth, and they used Kelthane to control mites. Well, it turned out that one of the inerts in Kelthane was DDT. And there was, when DDT was a pesticide, it was often only 5% of the actual total ingredient in the pesticide. And in the case of the Kelthane, there was 5% DDT in Kelthane. And there were a bunch of other inerts in Kelthane that were really toxic, but they didn't have to disclose them. And so a lot of people that have studied pesticides have concluded that there's almost as many in terms of pounds of toxic inerts in pesticides as there is toxic active ingredients that are on the label, right? And so those inerts, which oftentimes account for 90% of the pesticides, are often very, very toxic. They're not all just clay, they're not all just filler, they're not all just flow chemicals. They're toxic chemicals that are potentiators.